I traveled 12 hours just to see my firstborn grandson. 12 hours with swollen feet, a worn-out suitcase, and a heart pounding like the day my son was born. But when I stood outside the delivery room, my son, Logan, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen in him before. Not the look of a son. The look of a stranger wanting me to leave. If you've ever been rejected by the person you love most, watch this story to the end. Like and comment with the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. I want to tell you something about the day I turned 62. Most women my age talk about that birthday as a turning point. The age when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space, when you start sleeping in on Sundays without guilt, when you look in the mirror and make a kind of peace with the face looking back at you. I had started to believe that too. I had started to think that maybe the hardest years were finally behind me, that everything I had scraped and clawed and sacrificed for was finally going to mean something. Then my phone rang. It was Logan, my son, the one person on this earth I had given everything to. My youth, my sleep, my savings, my second chances at a life of my own. He called on a Tuesday evening in late October, and his voice had that careful, practiced quality it had taken on over the years, the one that told me he had rehearsed what he was going to say before he picked up the phone. "Mom," he said, "Natalie's due date is November 14th. We thought you should know." We thought you should know. Not we'd love for you to be there. Not we want you close. Just, we thought you should know. Like I was a neighbor. Like I was someone who needed to be notified out of basic courtesy, rather than someone who had rocked this man to sleep for years, who had held his hand through nightmares, who had eaten half portions of everything for a decade so he could have enough. But I didn't say any of that. I never did. "I'll be there," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. I live in Millhaven, Ohio. It's not a glamorous place. It's the kind of town where the diner on the corner has had the same menu since 1987, and everyone knows which families are struggling by how early their lights go off at night. I've lived there for 34 years, in the same house where I raised Logan, where I painted his bedroom walls pale blue when he was 4, because he told me blue was the color of sky, and he wanted to sleep underneath the sky every night. That house has seen things, hard things. The night his father died. The weeks after, when Logan was 9 years old and he used to crawl into bed beside me at 3 in the morning without saying a word, just pressing his small, warm body against my back like he was trying to keep us both from falling apart. The years when I worked mornings at the dry cleaners and evenings waitressing at a steakhouse, coming home after midnight with sore feet and grease on my uniform, and I would stand outside his bedroom door for just a few seconds to listen to him breathe, just to remind myself what all of it was for. He was everything. He was the whole point. So when he called to tell me his wife was due on November 14th, I did not stop to think about the fact that he hadn't called in 6 weeks before that. I did not stop to think about the fact that the last time I'd spoken to Natalie, she had answered my question about the nursery colors with 2 words and then handed the phone back to Logan. I did not stop to think about any of it. I booked a bus ticket the next morning, 12 hours each way, because the train was $60 more than I had budgeted, and I had already spent a small portion of my savings on a crib set I'd found at a second-hand shop, white wood, barely used, with little yellow ducks painted along the headboard. I'd spent an entire Saturday refinishing it, sanding it down, touching up the paint. I wrapped it in moving blankets and arranged for my neighbor Dorothy to keep it at her house until I could figure out how to get it to New York. I was 62 years old, and I was giddy. That is the only word for it. Giddy, like a child on the night before something wonderful. I arrived in New York on the morning of November 15th. Natalie had gone into labor a day early, which I only learned when I called Logan from the bus station, and he picked up on the 4th ring sounding distracted and harried and said, "She's already at the hospital, Mom. St. Harmon's, room 412, but just wait in the lobby when you get there, okay? I'll come find you." I didn't think anything of it. I took the subway, which I had not ridden in 11 years, and I got turned around once at a transfer and ended up backtracking 2 stops. And I arrived at St. Harmon's Medical Center at 11:43 in the morning with a carry bag over one shoulder and a wrapped gift under my arm. A handmade quilt from Dorothy, who had sewn little stars into the border because Logan had always loved stars as a boy. The lobby was bright and impersonal the way hospitals always are. That particular kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look slightly unwell. I found a seat near the elevator bank and I waited. I texted Logan, "I'm here, in the lobby, whenever you're ready." An hour passed. I got a cup of coffee from the vending machine. I checked my phone 12 times. I watched nurses in blue scrubs pass through the automatic doors, watched a man about Logan's age walk through holding a tiny car seat with a baby inside it, his whole face transformed by something I can only describe as barely contained joy. His wife walked beside him slowly, carefully, gripping his arm, and they were both laughing at something the nurse was saying. I watched them go through the glass doors and I felt something warm move through my chest. Soon, I thought. Soon that will be us. At 12:58, Logan appeared. He came through the elevator doors in a gray Henley and dark jeans, and he looked tired in the way that new fathers always look tired. Not the bad kind, just the overwhelmed kind, the wrung out by wonder kind. I stood up immediately. I lifted my arms. He hugged me, briefly. The kind of hug you give an aunt you see twice a year. Shoulders in, quick pat on the back, immediate release. "Hey, Mom." "Logan." I kept my hands on his arms, studying his face. "How is she? How's the baby? Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine, healthy. It's a boy, like we thought." A boy. My grandson. I felt my eyes fill and I blinked fast, not wanting to embarrass him. "Can I go up? I have a gift from Dorothy and I've been looking forward to this for so long, Logan. You have no idea." He shifted his weight. That was the first sign, and I missed it. I was too busy reaching for the quilt, smoothing the wrapping, too full of hope that had been building for 9 months to notice the way his eyes moved away from mine. "Listen, Mom." He said it quietly. He said it the way you tell someone something you've been putting off for a long time. "Natalie's really exhausted. She had a long labor, and her mom and her sister are already up there, and she's kind of at her limit with the visitors right now." I blinked. "Oh, that's fine. I can wait. I don't mind waiting. I've already been here an hour. I'm happy to." "It's not just about waiting." His voice dropped lower. I had to lean in to hear him. "She really only wants her family right now. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed." I stood very still. In my experience, there are moments in life where your brain receives information that your heart refuses to process. This was one of those moments. I heard every word he said. I understood the literal meaning of each one, but some deeper part of me kept insisting there had been a mistake, a miscommunication, some gap between what he meant and what he said. "Her family," I repeated. "Her mom, her sister, the people she's comfortable with." "Logan." My voice was very quiet. "I'm your mother." Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite regret. Something more complicated and more painful than either of those things. Something that told me this conversation had been planned, that he had gone over it in his head before he came down in that elevator, maybe had even rehearsed the exact words with Natalie. "I know," he said. "I know you are. And I'm sorry you came all this way, but I have to respect what she needs right now." What she needs. What she needs. I stood in that hospital lobby with Dorothy's quilt under my arm and 12 hours of bus travel in my legs. And I looked at my son. My son, the boy I had carried home from this very kind of hospital 33 years ago, in a blanket I'd knitted myself because I couldn't afford the ones in the store. And I didn't recognize him. Not because he had changed his hair or gained weight or looked older, though all of those things were true. I didn't recognize him because the man standing in front of me had made a choice. A deliberate, conscious, planned choice. And the choice was that I was not family. I don't remember everything I said after that. I know I didn't cry, not right there, not in front of him. That much I'm certain of because I made a decision in that moment. Some cool, quiet, exhausted part of me drew a line and said, "Not here, not for him, not like this." I said something about understanding. I said something about giving Natalie her space. I said something hollow and careful that let him off the hook, which I have since had a great deal of time to regret. He thanked me. He actually thanked me, the way you thank a delivery person for leaving a package at the door. Then he went back into the elevator and the doors closed, and I stood there alone in the middle of that bright, indifferent lobby while strangers walked around me and a PA system announced visiting hours in a voice that echoed off the walls. I stayed for a few more minutes. I'm not entirely sure why. Part of me, the stubborn and irrational part, kept waiting for the elevator doors to open again, for Logan to come back out, to say he'd made a mistake, to say, "Come on, Mom, the baby wants to meet his grandmother." The doors didn't open. I walked out of St. Harmon's Medical Center at 1:17 in the afternoon with the quilt under my arm and the weight of something I didn't have a name for yet pressing down on my sternum. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air, and I looked up at the building. All those windows, all those rooms, somewhere up there a baby I had been dreaming about for 9 months. And for one long moment, I let myself feel the full, unadorned reality of what had just happened. My son had chosen his wife's comfort over my presence at the birth of my first grandchild. Not because I had done something wrong, not because there had been a fight or a falling out or some specific injury I had caused, but simply because Natalie Hayes did not consider me family, and Logan Brooks, my Logan, the one I had built my entire adult life around, had decided she was right. I walked to the subway. I took it back to the bus station. The next bus to Millhaven didn't leave until 6 in the evening, so I sat in a plastic chair for 4 hours and 40 minutes, and I didn't call anyone, and I didn't cry, and I ate half a sandwich from the vending machine that tasted like nothing. And somewhere in those 4 hours and 40 minutes, I started to remember. It starts, the way these things always do, from the beginning. Not from that hospital lobby, not from Logan's careful, rehearsed speech at the elevator bank, not even from Natalie. It starts much earlier than that, in the particular silence of a house that has recently lost the only adult male who lived in it. I was 31 years old when Richard died. He was 34. Healthy, as far as anyone knew. He went for a run on a Saturday morning in March, and he didn't come back. An aneurysm, they told me later. One of those things that had been sitting in his brain like a ticking clock since before he was born, silent and invisible and utterly patient. He was 2 blocks from home when it happened. A neighbor found him. I got the call while Logan was in the living room watching cartoons. Logan was 9. He had just lost his first tooth the week before. He still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Clover, though he had recently started hiding it under his pillow when friends came over because he was beginning to understand that 9 was old enough to be embarrassed by certain things. I remember standing in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, looking through the doorway at the back of his head, at the way his hair was still mussed from sleeping, and thinking, I am the only one now. Not in a dramatic way, not in the collapsing to the floor way they show in movies, just that quiet, factual, devastating understanding. I am the only one now, and I cannot fall apart. So I didn't. I planned a funeral on a budget so thin I had to borrow against the car. I explained death to a 9-year-old using words I barely believed myself. I went back to work at the dry cleaners 11 days after I buried my husband because the rent was due in 3 weeks, and the savings account had $400 in it, and there was a child in that house who needed to eat breakfast every single morning without interruption. I worked 2 jobs for the next 4 years. 3, briefly, during the summer Logan was 12, when the water heater broke and the repair estimate was $700. I picked up weekend shifts at a garden center that spring, coming home with soil under my nails and sunburn across my forearms, and I got the water heater fixed before August. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound heroic. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the arithmetic. The specific, unglamorous, cumulative arithmetic of what it costs to raise a child alone on 2 incomes in a mid-sized Ohio town while also trying to keep something, some small, private, stubbornly persistent thing, alive inside yourself that isn't just Logan's mother. The arithmetic of missed social events and skipped dentist appointments, and the particular humiliation of sitting across from a loan officer when Logan was 17 and asking for enough to cover his first year at Ohio State because his partial scholarship hadn't covered the difference. I got the loan. I paid it back, all of it, in 63 monthly installments. I still have the letter the bank sent me when the balance cleared. I kept it in the same box where I keep Logan's kindergarten drawings, and his first Little League team photo, and the birthday card he made me when he was 8 years old. A folded piece of construction paper with a crayon drawing of the two of us holding hands under a yellow sun, and inside, in his careful crooked printing, "You are the best mom in the whole world. I love you forever and ever." I kept that card. I keep it still. Logan was gifted. I don't say that the way every parent says it. I say it because it was verifiably, documentably true. His math teacher at Millhaven Middle School pulled me aside when he was 12 and told me he was solving problems she hadn't seen kids his age attempt. His SAT scores were in the 97th percentile. He got into his engineering program at Ohio State on the strength of a portfolio he had assembled himself, and when he graduated 4 years later, magna cum laude, with a job offer from a firm in New York already in hand, I sat in that stadium in Columbus in a dress I'd bought on clearance at a department store, and I cried so hard the woman sitting beside me put her hand on my arm. I was so proud of him. I want you to hold on to that, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make it harder to remember, and I need you to understand that the pride was real. The love was real. The years of sacrifice weren't transactions. I didn't pour everything I had into that boy because I was expecting a return on my investment. I did it because he was my son, and I loved him with the kind of love that doesn't ask permission and doesn't calculate costs. But somewhere between that stadium in Columbus and the hospital lobby in New York, something changed, and I have spent a long time trying to pinpoint exactly when. The honest answer is that it didn't happen all at once. It happened the way erosion happens, slowly, incrementally, each small loss so minor that you don't name it at the time, and then one day you look at the landscape and you don't recognize it. The first year Logan was in New York, he called every Sunday. We talked for an hour sometimes, longer. He told me about his colleagues, about the city, about the project he was working on, a structural assessment for a bridge in Queens that he was clearly thrilled about. He asked about Millhaven, about Dorothy, about whether the Hendersons' old dog was still digging under our shared fence. He was still my son that first year. Present, curious, mine. Then he met Natalie. She was a financial analyst. He told me about her in March of the year he turned 27, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, careful and bright at the same time, like he was holding something precious he wasn't sure how to carry. I was glad for him. Genuinely, completely glad. I had worried sometimes that the way he'd grown up, just the two of us, the weight of everything resting on that small household, had made him wary of attachment. So when he told me about Natalie, I felt relief as much as joy. "I'd love to talk to her sometime," I said. "Whenever you think she's ready." "Sure, yeah," he said. "I'll set something up." He never did. I met Natalie for the first time at Thanksgiving of that year, when Logan brought her to Millhaven for 3 days. She was tall and carefully dressed, and possessed of a particular kind of composure that I have since learned to read as defensive rather than cold, though at the time I mistook it for shyness. She shook my hand at the door rather than hugging me, which I registered and then immediately forgave because not everyone is comfortable with physical affection from strangers. She answered my questions politely. She volunteered very little. She spent most of the 3 days on her phone or talking quietly with Logan in ways that stopped when I entered the room, and she was back in New York by Saturday afternoon, 2 days earlier than planned, something about a work deadline. Logan apologized. I said I understood. Neither of us said anything about the way the visit had actually felt. The next Thanksgiving, he didn't come home. The one after that either. I flew to New York for the wedding. Logan paid for my flight. I'll give him that. And I had a seat in the second row, right behind Natalie's parents and her sister Claire, who were all in the first row together and who had a shared ease with Logan, a fluency of inside jokes and casual touch, that told me they had been spending time with him regularly, that they knew him in the everyday sense in ways I no longer did. Natalie's mother, Diane, wore a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She hugged Logan when he walked down the aisle to take his place. She reached out and adjusted his lapel, and he let her. He looked at her with uncomplicated affection. I sat in the second row and I watched that, and I told myself it was fine, that it was good, That Logan, having more people who loved him, was not a subtraction from what we had. I almost believed it. At the reception, I was seated at table 9. I counted the tables. There were 11. Table 1 was the wedding party and immediate family. Table 9 was where they put the cousins and the college friends, and a couple of Logan's colleagues who didn't seem to know anyone else either. I sat between a man who worked in Logan's firm's Denver office and an elderly woman I eventually figured out was Natalie's great aunt, who spent most of the dinner talking to the woman on her other side. Logan danced with me at some point. The DJ played something he said was for the mothers, and we swayed on the dance floor for 3 minutes while he held my hand. He looked distracted. He kept glancing over his shoulder. "Are you happy?" I asked him. Because I needed to know, because I needed that to be true. "Yeah, Mom," he said. "I'm happy." I held on to that. When Natalie got pregnant, Logan called to tell me. He was warm on the phone, warmer than he'd been in a while. And I let myself believe it was the beginning of something. "You're going to be a grandmother," he said, and there was something genuine in his voice in that moment, some real feeling that hadn't been filtered or rehearsed. "I know," I said. My throat was tight. "I know, baby." I asked if I could come visit. He said he'd check with Natalie and let me know. He never let me know. I asked again 2 months later, and he said they were both exhausted and it wasn't a great time. I asked if there was a baby shower. He said Natalie's family was handling it, that it was a small thing, just close girlfriends and family. I said, of course, that made sense. I found out about the baby shower through a photo Natalie posted online. 12 people in a beautifully decorated apartment, pastel balloons, a tower of gifts. Diane was front and center in every picture. Claire was there. 3 women I didn't recognize. I was not there. I sat with my phone on my kitchen table in Mill Haven, Ohio, on a Saturday afternoon in June, looking at a photo of my son's wife surrounded by people celebrating a baby I would not be allowed to hold until he was already here, and I felt something happen inside me that I did not fully have a name for at the time. It wasn't anger exactly. Or it was anger, but anger is too simple a word for it. It was the specific, slow-burning ache of being made irrelevant in a story you helped write, of watching someone else take up the space that was supposed to be yours, of finally understanding, after years of smaller, more deniable moments, that this was not an accident, not a series of oversights, not a product of Natalie's shyness or Logan's busyness. This was a choice. They had built a life, and they had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was not part of it. I set my phone down. I looked at the blue walls of the kitchen. I had repainted them 3 years ago, chosen a shade Dorothy had helped me pick out, something warm and cheerful. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, the one Logan had sent me 2 Christmases ago, him and Natalie at some party, both of them smiling. I had put it there because I wanted evidence of his life where I could see it. I had put it there because it made me feel less far away. I took it down that afternoon, put it in a drawer. Then I went back to the refinished crib in Dorothy's garage, and I sat beside it on a folding chair for a while, running my hand along the painted yellow ducks, thinking about the October evening years ago, when Logan had looked up at me from his own crib, just a few days old, that incomprehensible smallness, and blinked, and I had thought, I would do anything, anything at all. I had meant it. I still meant it. That was the problem. November 15th. Bus station. 4 hours and 40 minutes until the 6 o'clock back to Mill Haven. I sat with Dorothy's quilt in my lap and I thought about all of it. The phone calls that thinned out, the visits that were rescheduled and then dropped, the wedding table, the baby shower photos, the careful way Logan had rehearsed his speech in the elevator bank. I thought about the hospital upstairs where my grandson was taking his first breaths in a room I was not allowed to enter. I thought about Diane, who was almost certainly up there right now, holding him, her face going soft the way new grandmothers' faces go soft, taking up a space that I had imagined for myself for 9 months, and had apparently lost without ever being told I was in a competition. I thought about Richard. I thought about how he would have handled this. Whether he would have been wiser than me, steadier, whether he would have seen earlier what I had spent years refusing to see. I thought about the construction paper birthday card. I love you forever and ever. And somewhere in that plastic chair in that bus station, Between the cold coffee and the half-eaten sandwich and the hum of the overhead lights, I felt something shift. Not break, not collapse, not the dramatic movie-style shattering that stories like this are supposed to have. Just shift, like something very slowly turning, like a compass needle finding a different north. I had spent 33 years being Logan's mother in the way that I believed mothers were supposed to be. Total, self-effacing, available, inexhaustible. I had built my identity so thoroughly around his needs that I had very nearly forgotten I was a person with my own edges, my own needs, my own right to be treated with basic dignity by people I loved. I hadn't forgotten entirely. There was still enough of me left to notice the sting, still enough to sit in a bus station and feel the full weight of what had been done to me. But the question, and this is the question that would take me a very long time to fully answer, was what I was going to do with that weight. Whether I was going to keep carrying it quietly, the way I had been carrying quiet things for 30 years, or whether, at 62, I was finally going to put it down. The 6 o'clock bus pulled up at 5:58. I gathered my bag. I picked up the quilt. I walked out through the glass doors into the cold November night. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was asking the question. And sometimes I would learn this slowly, painfully, over the months ahead. Asking the question is the first act of saving yourself. The 6-hour bus ride home gave me too much time to think, which is the cruelest thing a long bus ride can do to a person who is already hurting. I kept replaying it. Not just the lobby, not just Logan's face. I kept going further back, the way you do when something finally breaks open and you realize the fracture has been there for a long time, invisible beneath the surface, spreading quietly while you convinced yourself everything was fine. I watched the dark Ohio countryside pass outside the smeared bus window, and I let the memories come, because I was too tired to keep pushing them away. The truth was that I had known, on some level, for a long time. I had known, and I had refused to name it, because naming it would have meant admitting that the thing I had sacrificed the most for was the thing that was slowly disappearing. Not Logan himself, but the version of Logan who had once needed me, who had once chosen me. What? The distance had started small enough that I'd had every reason to excuse it. He was busy. New York was demanding. The job was high pressure. The city was expensive. He was building something from scratch in a place that didn't hand anything to anyone. I understood all of that. I told myself I understood it constantly, the way you repeat a thing until it stops feeling like a rationalization and starts feeling like a fact. The Sunday calls had dropped to every other Sunday by his second year in New York, then to once a month, roughly, with a few gaps that stretched to 6 or 7 weeks when he was on a deadline or traveling for work. I never said anything about the gaps. I told myself it wasn't fair to add pressure to a man who was already carrying a lot. When he got the promotion, senior structural engineer, a title that carried real weight in his field, I found out through a text message, not even a call. A text, at 10:40 on a Wednesday night, that said, "Got promoted today, senior engineer. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about the loan officer, the 63 monthly installments, the Saturday mornings at the garden center with soil under my nails. I thought about sitting at his kitchen table when he was 17, going through the financial aid forms together, page by page, because neither of us had done anything like that before, and the instructions made no sense. I texted back, "So proud of you. Always knew you would. Call me when you can." He called 3 weeks later. We talked for 20 minutes. He sounded fine, distant in a way I couldn't quite locate. Not cold, just absent, like he was running on a frequency that no longer quite overlapped with mine. I told myself it was the promotion, the adjustment, that things would settle. Then came Natalie, and settle was no longer the right word for what happened. I want to be careful here because it would be easy, satisfying even, to make Natalie into a simple villain. The calculating wife who swept in and cut the mother-in-law out. People who hear stories like this tend to reach for that shape automatically, because it's a clean story and clean stories are easier to carry than complicated ones. But the truth, as I have come to understand it after a great deal of painful reflection, is more complicated than that. Natalie was not a cartoon. She was a person with her own history, her own fears, her own particular and possibly genuine reasons for the way she behaved. I didn't know those reasons then. I wouldn't know them for a long time. What I knew was the result of them, and the result was that from the moment she became a permanent fixture in Logan's life, I became progressively less of one. The first time I noticed it clearly was the Christmas of the year they moved in together. Logan called to say they weren't coming to Millhaven that year. Natalie's family had a tradition in Connecticut. Her parents had a house there. Everyone always went. He said it like it was obvious, like it had already been decided and the call was a formality. "What about our tradition?" I said, and I hated myself a little for saying it because it sounded like guilt, and I had promised myself I would never use guilt on him. "Mom, come on! It's one Christmas. It's the third year in a row you haven't come home." There was a silence. "I flew you out to New York in October." "You did," I said. "And Natalie spent most of that visit in the bedroom." Another silence. Longer this time. "She wasn't feeling well." "I know," I said. "I know she wasn't." Neither of us said anything for a moment. "I'll call you Christmas morning," he said. He called at 2:15 in the afternoon. We talked for 11 minutes. I could hear voices in the background. Natalie's mother, I thought, and someone laughing, and the particular brightness of a room full of people who are all at ease with each other. Logan sounded happy, genuinely happy. I held on to that the way you hold on to the edge of a table when the floor is moving. I said Merry Christmas. I said I loved him. I hung up and I sat in my living room with the small tree I'd put up. I always put up a tree, even alone, because I refused to stop doing the things I had done when he was home. And I had a glass of eggnog and I watched a movie I'd seen before, and I was fine. I was fine. I kept saying that to myself until it flattened out into something I almost believed. Checked it. The wedding I have already told you about. Table 9. The dance that lasted 3 minutes. What I haven't told you is the conversation I had with Dorothy the morning after I flew home. Dorothy has been my next-door neighbor for 26 years. She is 71 now, small and sharp, and possessed of the particular wisdom that comes from having survived 2 divorces and a son who moved to Australia without much warning. She was waiting on her porch when my taxi pulled up, which meant she had been watching for me, which is exactly the kind of thing Dorothy does. "How was it?" she asked. I sat down on her porch steps. I was still in the dress I'd worn on the plane. "Beautiful ceremony," I said. "Natalie looked stunning." Dorothy looked at me for a moment. "Evelyn." "Table 9, I said. She was quiet. "Out of 11 tables, Dorothy. Table 9. She sat down beside me on the steps and didn't say anything, which is one of the things I love most about her. She didn't try to reframe it or excuse it or tell me Logan was probably just overwhelmed with logistics. She just sat there and let me feel it. "The thing is," I said after a while, "I don't think he even noticed. That's what gets me. I don't think he thought about it at all." "No," Dorothy said. "I don't think he did." That was somehow the worst part. Not malice, but indifference. Not that he had looked at the seating chart and placed me at table 9 deliberately, but that he had let Natalie handle the arrangements, and it hadn't occurred to him to check, to think, where will my mother be? Who will she know? Will she be okay? The boy I raised would have thought about that. The boy who used to check on me in the middle of the night when I worked late, who used to leave glasses of water outside my bedroom door before he went to sleep because he knew I always forgot to drink enough. That boy would have thought about it. I didn't know when that boy had become someone else. I still don't, entirely. But I know that table 9 was the moment I stopped being able to pretend. Boy! After the wedding, the erosion accelerated. Calls dropped to once a month, then less. When Natalie got pregnant and I asked if I could visit, the polite deflections I'd been getting for 2 years shifted into something more direct. "We're both really tired right now. The apartment is small and we're trying to get things organized. Maybe once the second trimester settles down." The second trimester came and went. I did not visit. I found myself doing something I had never done before. I started tracking Natalie's social media. Not obsessively, not every day, but enough. Enough to see the photos of the nursery she'd painted a warm sage green, the color I had suggested in a text message 3 months earlier that had gone unanswered. Enough to see the dinner party she and Logan had hosted in February, 8 people around a table, candles and wine glasses, and Logan laughing at something with his head thrown back the way he used to laugh when he was 16, and something genuinely caught him off guard. Diane was at that dinner party. She was in 2 of the photos. I was in none of them. I had never been invited. I kept looking at those photos longer than I should have. I kept looking at Diane, her ease in that apartment, the way she moved through the frame like she belonged there, the way Natalie leaned into her when they posed for a picture. And I tried, honestly tried, to find a way to interpret all of it that wasn't what it looked like. Maybe Diane lived closer. Maybe she had a relationship with Natalie that predated Logan. Maybe there were dynamics at work that I simply didn't understand. All of that was probably true, but it didn't change what I was looking at. It didn't change the fact that another woman was building the relationship with my grandchild that I had imagined having. It didn't change the fact that Diane would be in the first row at the hospital while I sat in the lobby. I put my phone down on my kitchen table. I went to the window and looked out at the street. The same street I'd looked at for 34 years. The maple tree that dropped its leaves on our shared sidewalk every October. The Henderson house with its new paint and the Ford's porch where their youngest had learned to ride a bike last summer. My life was here. Real and small and full of ordinary things. And somewhere in New York, my son was living his life in a circle that had slowly, methodically closed around me until I was on the outside of it, looking in. The question I kept circling back to, the one that kept me up some nights more than others, was whether I had done something to cause it. Whether there was a specific moment, a wrong word or a wrong approach, or some maternal failure I wasn't seeing clearly, that had set this in motion. I went over it the way you go over a math problem when the answer doesn't make sense. Backward, checking each step. The visits that hadn't gone well. Was I too present? Too eager? Had I crowded them? Had I said something to Natalie early on, some careless remark that had registered as critical and calcified into a grudge I didn't know existed? I couldn't find it. That's the honest answer. I searched for my own failures and I found some small ones, human ones, the ordinary mistakes of a mother navigating an adult son's new life without a map. But nothing that accounted for Table 9. Nothing that accounted for the baby shower I wasn't invited to. For Diane's hand on Logan's lapel, for my 11 minutes on the phone on Christmas afternoon. What I found instead, the more I searched, was something I had not wanted to look at directly. That this had very little to do with anything I had done, and almost everything to do with a quiet power dynamic that had been built inside Logan's marriage without my knowledge. One in which I occupied a specific position, tolerated but not welcomed, acknowledged but not valued, present on paper and absent in practice. And Logan had allowed it. That was the part I kept flinching away from and kept coming back to. Logan was not a passive man. He was thoughtful and capable and had, for the first 26 years of his life, been someone who paid attention to the people he loved. His allowing this was not an accident. It was a choice, made quietly, one small surrender at a time, until the accumulated weight of all those surrenders had turned into something that looked permanent. I tried one more time. This was about 4 months before the baby came. I called Logan on a Sunday morning, which I still did, out of habit, even when weeks had passed. And when he picked up, I could hear Natalie in the background, hear the particular quality of his attention splitting between the call and wherever she was in the apartment. "Logan," I said, "I need to talk to you about something and I need you to really hear me." "Okay," he said. "What's up?" "I feel like I'm losing you," I said. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I've been trying to find a less dramatic way to say it for a long time and I can't, so I'm just saying it directly. I feel like I'm on the outside of your life, and I don't know how to get back in, and I need you to tell me honestly, is there something I've done? Something I can fix? Because I would fix it, Logan. Whatever it is, I would fix it. There was a silence. "Mom, you're not losing me. I haven't been inside your apartment in 14 months. We've been busy. I found out about your promotion from a text message." Another silence. Longer. "I'm sorry about that," he said, and he sounded like he meant it, a little. "I should have called." "I'm not trying to make you feel bad," I said. "I'm trying to tell you that something is wrong, and I don't want to keep pretending it isn't. I'm your mother. I want to be part of your life. Not in the middle of everything, not in the way that's uncomfortable for Natalie. I understand she needs her space, and I respect that. But I need to know that there's a place for me. Of course there's a place for you, he said. Then show me where it is, I said. Because right now I can't find it. Another long silence. And then, from somewhere in the background, I heard Natalie say his name. Not sharply. Not a command. Just his name, in the particular tone of voice that meant, "Come here, I need you." And Logan said, "Mom, I have to go. We'll talk more about this, okay? I promise." He did not call back that day. He did not call back that week. 3 weeks later, he texted to tell me the baby was due in November. That was the last real conversation we had before I ended up in that hospital lobby. Well, I got home from New York on the morning of November 16th. I unlocked my front door, put down my bag, and stood in my kitchen for a long time without moving. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet when you've been away and everything has continued existing without you. The refrigerator hum, the creak of the floorboards, the particular quality of morning light through the curtains over the sink. I looked at the drawer where I'd put Logan's photograph. I didn't open it. I put on a pot of coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table. And I thought about what Logan had said in the lobby. She only wants her family right now. And I thought about all the months leading up to that moment, all the small rejections I had absorbed and explained away, and I finally let myself sit inside the full weight of what I had been carrying. Not with self-pity. Or maybe with a little self-pity, honestly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because that would be another kind of dishonesty, and I've had enough of those. But mostly with something clearer, something that felt, for the first time in a long time, close to clarity. I had given Logan everything I had, and somewhere along the way, without either of us fully realizing it, he had learned to take everything I offered without asking whether there was a cost. Not because he was cruel, because I had never let him see the cost, because I had been so determined to be the kind of mother who never burdened her child that I had become invisible to him. Needs-free, infinitely available. The person you could call when you wanted to and forget about when you didn't. I had done that. That part was on me. But there is a difference between a child not seeing the cost and a grown man choosing not to look. Logan was 33 years old. He had been watching me navigate the edges of his life with careful, accommodating grace for years. He knew, he had to know, that something was wrong, and he had chosen, repeatedly, to let Natalie's comfort take precedence over my presence. That choice had a name. And that morning, sitting in my quiet kitchen with my coffee cooling in front of me, I finally said the name out loud, to no one but myself. It was not a name I had expected to give to anything my son did. But it was the right name, and I was done pretending it wasn't. I pulled out a notepad from the kitchen drawer, the one where I kept grocery lists and reminder notes, and I wrote a single line at the top of the page. What do I want the rest of my life to look like? I had no answer yet, not a real one, but writing the question down was the first honest thing I had done in years. And somewhere across the room, in the closed drawer beneath the counter, Logan's photograph sat in the dark, and I left it there. The notepad stayed on my kitchen table for 3 days before I wrote anything else on it. I'd look at that single line every morning when I sat down with my coffee. What do I want the rest of my life to look like? And I'd sit with it for a while, and then I'd get up and do something practical, because practical things are easier than the large questions. I cleaned the gutters. I reorganized the pantry. I walked to Dorothy's and helped her put her storm windows in for winter, and we didn't talk about New York at all, which was exactly what I needed. Dorothy has always understood the difference between the times I need to talk and the times I need to do something with my hands and be near another person without having to explain myself. Logan did not call. He sent a text on the 3rd day. A photograph, actually. The baby. Wrapped in a white hospital blanket, face scrunched in that ancient, half-formed way of newborns, eyes closed. The caption said, Eli, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, everyone healthy. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at that photograph for a very long time. Eli. My grandson's name was Eli. I had not been consulted, had not been told in advance, had not been given the courtesy of a phone call to announce it. I found out my grandson's name the same way a distant acquaintance would, through a text message alongside a photo that I suspected had been sent to a group thread rather than to me specifically. I typed back, "He's beautiful. Thank you for sending this." I stared at what I'd written. Then I deleted "thank you for sending this" because I was done thanking people for doing the bare minimum. I sent, "He's beautiful. His name suits him." I put the phone down and I did not cry. I was starting to notice that I was crying less. Not because the pain was diminishing. If anything, it was sharpening, clarifying into something more precise and harder edged than the blunt grief of the bus station. But there is a point at which the body runs low on certain responses. And I think I had begun, without quite deciding to redirect the energy that crying had been using into something else. I just didn't know what yet. Sad. December came. Then January. Then a February that was brutally cold even by Ohio standards, the kind of cold that made the old pipes in my house knock and groan, the kind that kept me from taking my evening walks for 2 solid weeks. I was in the house more than usual, and being in the house more than usual meant I had more time alone with my thoughts, which was not always a comfortable thing. I had started the habit, and I'm not proud of this, but I'm telling it because it's true, of checking Natalie's social media more than I should have. Once a day at first, then more. Not because I expected to find anything good. I think, honestly, because I needed to be able to feel the full shape of what I was excluded from, like pressing a bruise to understand where it begins and ends. What I found in January and February was a careful, curated document of a life I was not in. Eli's first bath. Eli's first smile. Natalie's caption said, "We think it's a real one," with 3 little hearts. Eli in a carrier on Logan's chest, while Logan made coffee in their kitchen, Logan looking tired and rumpled and deeply, visibly happy. Diane was in several photos, always natural, always clearly at ease. Holding Eli on the couch, standing in the kitchen while Natalie sat nearby. Once outside a restaurant with Logan and Natalie on either side of her like bookends. I was not in any of them. I had not been to New York since November. I had held my grandson for approximately 6 minutes total in the 48 hours after his birth when Logan had finally, reluctantly allowed me a brief visit. 6 minutes. I had counted because it was all I had, and counting was the only way to hold on to it. Dorothy found me on her porch one evening in February, sitting on the step in the cold without a coat on, my phone face down on the wood beside me. She came out, took one look at me, went back inside, and returned with 2 mugs of tea and a blanket she threw around my shoulders without asking. "I keep looking," I said, when she sat down. "I know," she said. "I should stop." "You should," she agreed. "You will, eventually." "He looked happy," I said. "In the photos. Logan looked genuinely happy." Dorothy was quiet for a moment, holding her mug in both hands. "That's a hard thing to see when you're hurting." "No," I said slowly. It's not the hard part. I want him to be happy. I have always wanted him to be happy. That's never been the question." I picked up my mug and stared into it. "The hard part is that he looks happy without me in it, and I keep trying to decide whether that's something I have to accept or something I have a right to fight." "What do you think?" Dorothy asked. "I think I've been fighting the wrong way for a long time," I said. Quietly, politely, accepting every reduction like it was reasonable and waiting for things to get better on their own, and they never got better, they just got smaller. Dorothy didn't say anything. She leaned her shoulder against mine, and we sat like that in the cold for a while, and I decided somewhere in that silence that I was going to stop watching other people live my son's life for me, that I was going to put the phone down and turn my eyes towards something I could actually affect. I went inside. I deleted Natalie's account from my saved pages. I did not go back. Spring arrived, and with it a kind of fragile equilibrium. I still thought about Eli every day. His face in that hospital blanket, the particular smell of him in those 6 minutes, the way his fingers had curled around mine without knowing who I was. I still thought about the accumulation of everything that had brought me to that lobby. But I had stopped picking at it constantly, stopped needing to verify my own pain by searching for new evidence. I started walking again. Long walks, the kind I hadn't taken since Richard was alive, out past the park at the end of Millhaven's Main Street, through the cemetery where he was buried, which sounds morbid but has always felt to me like a place for thinking rather than grieving. I started having dinner with Dorothy twice a week. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, which I mention not because it became a transformative passion, but because it got me out of the house on Wednesday evenings and into a room with 7 other women between the ages of 58 and 74 who were all doing the same thing, finding new reasons to occupy their hands. I did not reach out to Logan. This was not a strategy, not a calculated move. It was simpler and more honest than that. I was tired of initiating, tired of performing ease and warmth and flexibility in a relationship that cost me far more than it cost him. I had nothing left to offer at the moment, and I was too exhausted to offer things I didn't have. He texted occasionally, short messages, a few weeks apart, a photo of Eli at 2 months, mouth open in what was unmistakably a laugh, a message in March that said "Hope Ohio's warming up," as if we were casual acquaintances exchanging pleasantries about the weather. One in April that said "Eli's sleeping through the night." Finally, we survived with an emoji I hadn't seen him use before, something his life with Natalie had added to his vocabulary. I responded to all of them. Briefly, warmly, without the elaborate emotional investment I used to pour into every reply. I was done performing unconditional enthusiasm for breadcrumbs. I could be kind and honest at the same time. That was something I was learning, slowly, at 62. Then came May, and May changed everything. It started with a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, a 212 area code, New York City. The woman who left the message identified herself as a billing coordinator from St. Harmon's Medical Center. She said there was an outstanding balance on a patient account, that she was reaching out to the listed financial contact, and that she would appreciate a return call at my earliest convenience. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I sat down, because my legs had done something unreliable. I called the number back and I got the billing coordinator, a woman named Sandra, professionally neutral, clearly used to delivering uncomfortable information without letting any personal feeling attached to it. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "thank you for calling back. I'm reaching out regarding the account of Eli Brooks. You're listed as the financial contact for this patient." "I'm listed as the what?" A brief pause. "The financial contact. The person responsible for billing inquiries and account matters." I kept my voice very level. "Who listed me?" "The admission paperwork indicates Logan Brooks as the primary account holder, with you designated as the financial contact." She paused again. "The current outstanding balance is $14,800. $14,800. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen table to keep it steady. "Can I ask when this designation was made?" "The paperwork was processed during admission, November 15th. November 15th, the day I had sat in the lobby. The day Logan had stood at the elevator bank and told me Natalie only wanted her real family nearby. While I had been sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting room downstairs, clutching Dorothy's quilt and eating a vending machine sandwich, Logan had been filling out paperwork upstairs listing me as the person responsible for the bill. He hadn't called me, hadn't texted, hadn't said a word about it. For 6 months, this bill had existed with my name on it, and no one had told me. "Sandra," I said, and my voice was very quiet and very careful, the voice I use when I am most furious. "I need you to understand something. I was not present at this patient's birth. I was not consulted about the paperwork. I was not informed that my name had been used in this way, and I did not authorize anyone to list me as a financial contact for any account." Another brief pause. "I understand. Would you like to dispute the designation?" "I would like you to tell me what my legal obligations are under this designation." She explained in measured terms that a financial contact designation without a signed agreement is generally not legally enforceable, that it's an administrative designation, not a legal one, and that my signature would be required for any actual financial responsibility to transfer to me. I asked her to send everything in writing to the address she had on file, and I thanked her and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. 6 months. He had listed me as the financial contact 6 months ago, and he had said nothing, and I had been sending him friendly texts about Eli's sleeping schedule while a $14,000 bill sat somewhere in a filing system with my name attached to it. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because the easy version of this story would have me feel only righteous anger, and the truth is more layered than that. There was anger, yes, a cold, steady anger that settled into me like stone. But underneath it was something older and more painful, because this wasn't the first time Logan had treated me as a resource rather than a person. It was just the first time he'd done it on paper. The dry cleaners, the waitressing job, the garden center Saturdays, the 63 monthly loan installments. Every choice I had ever made that quietly reduced my own needs in service of his. He had grown up absorbing all of that as baseline, as the natural order, as what mothers did. And somewhere in that absorption, he had developed a working assumption that I would always cover whatever needed covering, always step in when there was a gap, always be the soft place that caught him when something fell. He had not thought of me as the person in the lobby. He had thought of me as the safety net, and the safety net, apparently, was also responsible for the hospital bill. I did not call Logan that day. I waited, because I wanted to be clear-headed when I did, and I was not clear-headed that day. I walked to Dorothy's, which is what I do when I need to be somewhere that isn't my own head, and I sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything, all of it. The billing coordinator, the amount, the date, the fact that this had been sitting there for 6 months. Dorothy set down her teacup very deliberately. He listed you as the financial contact on the day he told you that you weren't welcome in the room. On the same day, I confirmed, while I was in the lobby. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I had not expected from her. Evelyn, I've been watching you be gracious about things that didn't deserve grace for a very long time. And I love you, and I've tried to stay out of it, but I'm going to say one thing, and then I'll stop. Say it, I said. A person who will do that, who will say you're not family enough to be in this room and then list you as the money contact in the same breath. That person is not confused about your value. He knows exactly what you're worth to him. He's just decided it's financial. I didn't respond, but I held on to what she said for the next several hours, turning it over, checking it from different angles, looking for the place where it was wrong. I couldn't find one. I called Logan the following morning. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. Usually I got voicemail on weekday mornings, and he sounded alert and slightly rushed, which meant he was either already at work or heading there. Mom, hey, what's up? I need to talk to you about something. Sure, give me 1 second. I heard a door close, the ambient noise dimming. Okay, what's going on? I got a call from St. Harmon's billing department yesterday, I said, regarding Eli's account. A silence. The outstanding balance is $14,800, I said, and I've been listed as the financial contact. Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence I heard something I hadn't expected. Not surprise. He wasn't surprised. He knew about the balance. He may have even known they were going to call. Logan, I said, how long have you known about this bill? Mom, it's a complicated situation. The insurance didn't cover as much as we expected, and we've been dealing with it. But how long have you known? A beat. Since January. 4 months ago. 4 months of Eli's sleeping through the night texts and Ohio warming up messages, and he had known for 4 months that there was a hospital bill with my name on it. Why didn't you tell me? I said. Because I didn't want to stress you out. I was handling it. You were handling it by listing me as the financial contact? That was just the paperwork, Mom. It doesn't mean... Logan. I stopped him. I had never used that particular tone with him before. Not flat exactly, but stripped of the usual warmth, the usual padding I put around hard things. I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I'm going to say something and I need you to actually hear it. I am not a financial safety net. I am not someone you designate on paperwork when the bill is too large to handle. I am your mother, and I will not be paying this bill. Silence. Mom, I'm not asking you to pay the whole thing. I just thought maybe you could help with... No, I said. Just that. One word. I don't think I had ever said a single clean no to Logan in his life. Not without softening it, not without an explanation attached, not without finding some alternative I could offer so he wouldn't feel rejected. This one came out without any of that, and when it landed, I felt it physically. A release, like something that had been held very tight for a very long time, finally loosening. No? His voice shifted. The careful tone dropped away. You're serious? You won't even... Mom, we have a newborn. We're dealing with a lot right now. I thought family. Don't, I said. Don't use that word right now. You told me I wasn't family enough to be in the room when Eli was born, and then you listed me as the person responsible for the bill. You don't get to choose what category I belong to based on what's convenient for you. A long silence. That's not fair, he said. His voice had gone tight. That's not what happened. Then tell me what happened. It was a difficult situation. She needed... I know what she needed, I said. You told me. She needed her real family, so let her real family help with the bill. Mom, I'm being what? I said, quietly, without heat. Tell me what I'm being, Logan. He didn't answer. I'm going to contact St. Harmon's in writing and dispute the financial contact designation, I said. I'm not legally obligated, and a billing coordinator confirmed that for me. I won't be receiving further calls about this account, and I would appreciate it if you didn't list my name on documents without my knowledge again. I heard him exhale, sharp and disbelieving. I can't believe you're doing this. I know, I said. I don't think you can, and I think that tells us both something important. I said goodbye. I hung up. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, on top of the notepad where I'd written my question 3 months ago. My hands were not entirely steady. My heart was going fast, the way it does when you've done something irreversible, something you've been circling for a long time and have finally, in one committed motion, stepped into. He called back 12 minutes later. I didn't answer. He called again 20 minutes after that. I didn't answer that time either. He left a voicemail that I listened to once, his voice cycling through hurt and anger and something that sounded briefly like genuine shock, as if he had never considered that I might refuse, as if that possibility had simply not existed in his model of how I worked. That shocked me more than almost anything else. He called a third time around 9 that evening. I stared at the phone and I thought about 33 years, about blue bedroom walls and Clover the stuffed rabbit and 63 monthly installments, about a lobby in November, about 6 minutes. I let it ring, all 4 rings, and then voicemail. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed. I lay in the dark, and I listened to my house settle around me in the cold, those familiar sounds I had been falling asleep to for 30 years, and I noticed something unexpected. I was not devastated. I was shaking, a little. I was uncertain in the way you're always uncertain after a door has been closed, and you're not sure yet what's on the other side. But I was not devastated. I was something else, something harder to name, and I was beginning to suspect far more valuable. I was clear. For the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, I knew exactly where I stood and exactly what I was willing to carry and exactly what I was not. There was no performance in it, no calculation about how to manage Logan's feelings or soften the blow or leave room for him to feel like he hadn't been wrong. I had simply told the truth, and I had not apologized for it. The phone didn't ring again that night. I slept better than I had in months, which is the kind of thing that sounds wrong when you say it out loud, but makes complete sense if you've ever spent years being kept awake by hope and found out, finally, what it feels like to rest without it. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in 33 years of being Logan's mother. Not the silence of a busy week, not the silence of a missed Sunday call or a text that went unanswered for a few days. This was something different in texture and weight. The silence of a relationship that had reached an edge and stopped, that was waiting to find out whether either person would cross back over. Logan did not call for 3 weeks after that night. No texts about Eli, no weather pleasantries. Nothing. I want to tell you I handled it with complete equanimity. I want to tell you I filled those 3 weeks with purposeful activity and felt nothing but the clean satisfaction of a woman who had finally stood her ground. That would be partially true and mostly a lie. The first week was hard in the specific way that doing the right thing is often hard. The rightness doesn't insulate you from the cost of it. I second-guessed myself at 2 in the morning more than once. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I ran through the conversation again, checking for the place where I'd been too harsh, too abrupt, where I could have said the same true things in a softer way that wouldn't have left this particular silence behind. I found a few of those places. I probably could have been gentler. I had been carrying a lot of compressed feeling for a long time, and some of it had come out in the flatness of my voice, in the way I'd cut him off. But I kept coming back to the same fact: $14,800, listed without my knowledge or consent. 6 months of silence about it, and the assumption, the baked-in, unexamined assumption, that when the moment came, I would cover whatever needed covering because that was what I did. That was what I had always done. I could have been gentler about the delivery. I could not have been different about the answer. And eventually, in the second week, I made a kind of peace with that distinction. Boate. I started doing things I had been putting off for years, not as a statement, not as a deliberate act of self-reclamation with a name attached to it. Just because the space that had been filled by anxious waiting, waiting for Logan's calls, waiting to be included, waiting for things to get better, had opened up. And I needed to put something real into it. I had a leaking window frame on the east side of the house that I'd been meaning to fix since the previous winter. I learned how to do it from a video on my laptop, bought the materials myself, and spent a Saturday afternoon doing it badly at first, and then adequately. The seal held through June. Small victory. Mine. I started cooking properly again. For years I had made half meals, single servings of things that required minimal effort, because cooking for one when you were used to cooking for two had always felt like a reminder of what was missing. I started inviting Dorothy for dinner on Fridays and making actual meals. The braised chicken I used to make on Sundays when Logan was in high school, a lemon pasta I found in a library cookbook, cornbread from scratch because Richard had loved cornbread, and I realized one day that I had stopped making it after he died, and didn't know why. The watercolor class continued. I was not talented. My trees looked like clouds, and my clouds looked like nothing in particular. The woman who taught the class, a retired art teacher named Gail, who had the patient, precise manner of someone who had spent decades not flinching at bad work, told me I had interesting instincts about color, which I suspect was the most diplomatic thing she could find. I kept going anyway, every Wednesday evening, because the point had never been the painting. I began to understand, rebuilding something. Not dramatically, not with a plan or a vision board or any of the things that self-help books suggest. Just incrementally, Wednesday by Wednesday, Friday dinner by Friday dinner, one badly sealed window frame at a time. And the questions I had written on that notepad, what do I want the rest of my life to look like, was beginning, slowly, imprecisely, to answer itself. Logan texted in the 4th week. Not an apology, not an opening to conversation. A photograph of Eli sitting up unsupported for the first time, listing slightly to one side, arms out for balance, expression one of absolute concentrated effort. The caption said, first time sitting up on his own, 7 months. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I typed, look at him, he's working so hard. And I sent it, and I meant it completely, because whatever was unresolved between Logan and me had nothing to do with how I felt about Eli. Those were entirely separate things, and I was determined to keep them that way. Logan sent back a thumbs-up emoji. We continued like that for a while. Occasional photographs, minimal words, a kind of careful, provisional contact that was entirely different from what we'd had before. Not better, not worse, just honest in a way the previous version had not been. We were not pretending everything was fine. We were not performing warmth we didn't currently have. We were simply two people who were related and did not know yet what that relationship was going to look like going forward. I could live with that. It was, at minimum, real. The months moved. Summer came to Millhaven, and with it the particular slowness of Ohio in July. The heat that settled over everything by 10 in the morning and didn't lift until well past dark, the smell of Dorothy's garden coming through my kitchen window, the kids on the Henderson family's back porch running through a sprinkler the way kids have done in every summer since anyone can remember. I thought about Eli in that July heat and wondered if he was crawling yet. I did not ask Logan. I waited until he told me, which he did in mid-July. A short video, 30 seconds, Eli moving across a kitchen floor with the lopsided, determined scramble of a new crawler, and Logan's voice off camera saying, "Go, go, go, buddy." Go with a laugh that was so familiar, so completely his, that it cracked something open in my chest. I watched that video 6 times. I did not respond immediately because I needed a few minutes first, and when I did respond, I kept it simple. He is absolutely going to keep you both running. Logan sent back a laughing emoji, and then, a few minutes later, something unexpected. "Yeah, we're already exhausted." It was the first thing he had said that sounded even remotely like honesty about how things actually were. I noticed it. I didn't press it. I let it sit. September came. The watercolor class started its fall session. Dorothy and I drove to Columbus for a long weekend, the first time I had done anything that resembled a trip for myself in years. We walked through a botanical garden and ate at a restaurant that was nicer than either of us would usually spend money on, and Dorothy ordered a glass of wine she described as unnecessarily excellent, and I laughed until my eyes watered, and it was one of the best days I'd had in longer than I could calculate. I was not healed. I want to be clear about that. Healing is not a destination you arrive at. It's something you do continuously, in uneven increments, and some days you're further along and some days something small catches you off guard. A song, a smell, a photograph, and you're back at the beginning for an hour. But I was better than I had been. I was building something that belonged to me. And then, on a Tuesday evening in October, almost exactly 1 year after I had stood in that hospital lobby, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a 212 area code. New York. My first thought, irrational and immediate, was St. Harmon's billing department again. My stomach dropped in the half-second before I answered. "Mrs. Brooks?" A woman's voice. Not Sandra from billing. Younger, slightly breathless. "This is a nurse calling from St. Harmon's Medical Center. I'm trying to reach family members for a patient. Is this Evelyn Brooks?" "It is," I said slowly. "I'm calling regarding Natalie Brooks. She was admitted this afternoon. We have you listed as an emergency contact." I sat down on the nearest chair. "What happened?" "I'm not able to share medical details over the phone, but I can tell you the patient is stable. We're trying to reach her husband, Logan Brooks. We haven't been able to get through to him directly. Do you have another number where we can—" "I'll reach him," I said. "Give me 5 minutes." I called Logan. He picked up on the first ring, which almost never happened, and the sound of his voice when he said hello told me immediately that something had already gone wrong, that my call was arriving inside a situation he was already in the middle of. "Logan," I said, "the hospital just called me. What's happening?" A pause. Then, haltingly, She's been struggling for a few months. I should have said something. His voice broke slightly at the end and then recovered, the way men do when they're trying very hard not to fall apart. "She had a bad episode this afternoon. I took her in." "Where's Eli?" "With a neighbor right now, but I can't. I'm at the hospital, Mom, and I don't know how long I'm going to be here, and I need to figure out—" "I'm coming," I said. Silence. "Mom, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," I said. "I'm coming anyway. I'll get the earliest bus I can find and I'll text you the arrival time. Make sure Eli is somewhere safe tonight and don't argue with me about this." He didn't argue. He said, in a voice that was smaller than I'd heard from him since he was very young, "Okay." I booked a 6:30 bus. I packed a bag. I called Dorothy, who said go before I'd finished explaining, who told me she'd check the house while I was gone, who squeezed my hand on the porch and didn't say anything else because she didn't need to. I want to tell you clearly why I went, because I think it would be easy to misread it. I did not go because I had forgiven everything. I did not go because the hospital bill had stopped mattering, or the lobby, or Table 9, or any of it. I did not go because Logan had asked me to, or because Natalie deserved my help, or because this was the moment I'd been waiting for to be welcomed back in. I went because there was a 14-month-old child in New York who was mine too. Mine in the only way that actually counts, in the bone-deep, non-negotiable way. And because I had been given the chance to choose who I was going to be, and I chose to be someone who shows up. Not because showing up was required of me, because it was what I wanted to do with my own life, on my own terms. That difference mattered. That difference was everything. I arrived in New York at 7 the next morning and took a car directly to the hospital. Logan met me in the lobby. The same fluorescent light, the same automatic doors. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red at the edges, and there was a quality to his stillness, standing there in yesterday's clothes, that reminded me painfully of the way he'd looked at 9 years old in the weeks after Richard died. A person holding themselves very carefully together because they were not sure what would happen if they let go. I did not hug him the way I'd wanted to hug him in this lobby a year ago, the full arms around him hug of a mother who has missed her child. I put my hand on his arm, briefly, and I said, "Tell me what's happening." He told me, standing in the lobby rather than sitting, the way people tell hard things when sitting still feels impossible. Natalie had been struggling with severe anxiety and depression for several months. It had started after Eli was born, postpartum, but they hadn't gotten help early enough, and it had compounded quietly, and Logan had been managing it alone while also working, while also caring for Eli, while also trying to keep Natalie's family from worrying too much, and he had been stretched so thin for so long that he had stopped being able to see the situation clearly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. Quietly, without accusation, though I felt some. He shook his head. "I didn't know how. After everything, after the bill, after the way we left things, I didn't think you'd want to hear from me." "Logan," I said, "I've always wanted to hear from you. That was never the issue." He looked at me then, really looked at me, in a way he hadn't in years. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, not the movie version of a son realizing his mistakes in a single moment of clarity. More like a gradual refocus. Like something coming back into view. "I know," he said. "I know that now." He lost his job 2 weeks later. He told me on the phone, his voice flat and exhausted, and I could hear Eli in the background making the sounds of a child who needs attention and doesn't understand why the adults around him are so quiet. The firm had been restructuring. He was not the only one. The timing was, objectively, as brutal as timing could be. Natalie in partial hospitalization, an apartment in New York they couldn't afford on one income, a toddler who needed consistency none of them currently had. "What do you need?" I asked him. "I don't know," he said. And that honesty, that bare admission of not knowing, was worth more to me than anything carefully managed he could have offered. "Okay," I said. "Then we figure it out together. One thing at a time." It wasn't a fairy tale moment. It wasn't the scene where everything clicks into place and the music swells. What it actually was, two people on either end of a phone call, both of them tired, neither of them entirely sure of the ground beneath their feet, agreeing to try. That's all. But I've lived long enough to know that trying, genuinely, without a performance attached to it, is harder and rarer than it sounds. I came back to New York that November. 1 year, almost to the day, after the lobby. This time Logan met me at the door of their apartment. This time I went inside. Eli was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by board books, and he looked up when I came in the way toddlers look up at things. With complete, uncomplicated curiosity, without the layered social assessments that adults bring to every encounter. He looked at me for a moment. Then he held out a book. Not to Logan, to me. I sat down on the floor beside him, and I took the book. It was about trucks. He pointed at the pictures and made sounds that were nearly words, and I made the same sounds back, and Logan stood in the doorway watching us with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Complicated and raw, and something that might have been shame if it had been processed fully, which it hadn't yet and wouldn't be for some time. Natalie was not home that day. She was at an outpatient appointment. I had not spoken to her since before Eli was born. That conversation was still coming, and I was not naive about what it would require. But in that moment, on that floor, with Eli pressing a picture of a dump truck toward me with great seriousness, I let myself be exactly where I was. Not thinking about what had been, not managing what was coming, just there. Over the following weeks, Natalie and I were in the same space more often without speaking much. Parallel existences in a small apartment, two people orbiting carefully around each other while Eli held the center. I cooked when I was there because cooking was something I could do with my hands that kept the silence from becoming unbearable. Logan started putting together job applications in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and the focused, slightly desperate energy of a man trying to rebuild quickly. Natalie came home from appointments tired, moved through the apartment quietly. Then one evening, a Wednesday, I remember, because I had thought about my watercolor class that morning and felt a pang of something like homesickness for Millhaven. Natalie came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and sat down at the table. I heard the chair scrape. I turned around. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. She was the same tall, carefully composed person she had always been, except the careful composure had come apart at the seams in the way it does when someone has been through something that doesn't respect presentation. Her hair was down. She wasn't wearing the kind of clothes she'd worn the few times I'd seen her before, the polished, deliberate outfits of a woman who used her exterior as a kind of armor. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, like a person rather than a performance. "Evelyn," she said. She didn't quite meet my eyes at first. Would you sit down for a minute?" I dried my hands. I sat. We looked at each other across the kitchen table for a moment, and I thought about Table 9, about the baby shower photos, about the lobby, about $14,800. I thought about Eli on the living room floor with his dump truck book. "I owe you an apology," Natalie said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was effortful. "More than one. I've owed you one for a long time, and I've been telling myself stories about why it wasn't necessary, or why you wouldn't want to hear it, or why it was more complicated than a straightforward apology could cover." She stopped. Those were all excuses. I waited. "I was scared of you," she said. "That probably doesn't make sense, or maybe it sounds ridiculous given everything. But I grew up in a family where my mother is a good woman, but she had very clear ideas about how things should be done and who was in charge of what. And when Logan and I got serious, I think I was terrified that you would try to run our life, that you would be in everything, that I would end up with two mothers telling me what to do and nowhere that was just mine." She looked down at the table. "So I pushed first, before you could. I convinced myself I was protecting something, but really I was just afraid." I sat with that for a moment, the honesty of it, the smallness of the origin, fear, ordinary human fear, making decisions that compounded into years of exclusion. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't hurt," I said finally, "because it did, profoundly. Things happened that I'm still working through." She nodded. She didn't flinch from that. "But I'm also not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here because there's a child in that living room who needs his family to figure out how to be in the same room without going to war. And because Logan is my son, and I'm not willing to give up on what that means, even when it's hard." "I know," she said. Her voice had gone quiet. "I didn't know what you were until you weren't there." Does that make sense? I didn't understand what we'd taken from Eli until I watched what he does when you walk in the door. I thought about the dump truck book, the way he'd held it out, not to Logan, to me. "Yeah," I said. "It makes sense. We didn't hug. We didn't cry on each other's shoulders. What we did was sit at a kitchen table in a small New York apartment and begin, carefully, imperfectly, without any guarantees, the slow and difficult work of telling each other the truth. That was not nothing. In fact, in my experience, truth told between two people who have been avoiding it for years is one of the most exhausting and most valuable things a human being can do." I went to bed that night in Eli's room, on the air mattress Logan had set up between the crib and the bookshelf, and I listened to my grandson breathe in the dark, that small, steady, absolute sound, and I thought about the question I had written on the notepad in my kitchen a year ago. What do I want the rest of my life to look like? It was not going to look the way I had imagined when Logan was born. It was not going to look like the uncomplicated grandmother I had pictured in hospital waiting rooms. It was going to be harder than that, more negotiated, more honest, built on ground that had been broken up and would need tending, but it was going to be real. And I had decided, somewhere in the long year behind me, that real was worth more than comfortable. That a relationship built on truth, even a painful one, was worth more than 100 easy silences. Eli turned in his sleep and made a small sound, and I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. Outside, New York went on doing what it always does, loud and relentless and entirely indifferent to the quiet, significant things happening inside its buildings. Inside, one family tried again. It was a start, just a start. And starts are fragile, uncertain, unfinished things. But they are also, always, the only way anything ever gets built. Starts are fragile. I knew that going in. I had lived long enough to understand that the moment two people decide to try is not the same as the moment things actually get better. The deciding is a door. What's on the other side of it is still a long, unlit hallway that you have to walk through without knowing how far it goes or what's waiting at the end. Natalie and I had sat at that kitchen table and told each other the beginning of the truth. And that was real. And it mattered. But the morning after, we still had to make coffee in the same small kitchen and figure out how to be in each other's presence without the conversation becoming a buffer for all the years we hadn't spoken honestly. It was awkward. I'm telling you that plainly because the alternative, pretending it smoothed itself out quickly, would be an insult to how hard the real thing actually was. The first 2 weeks I stayed in New York were the most uncomfortable I had experienced in that apartment. Natalie and I were civil, careful, occasionally warm in the way of people who are genuinely trying and still don't quite know how. We talked about Eli. That was the safe ground, the shared territory where neither of us had to navigate the older, loaded history. We talked about what he was eating, what sounds he was making, the fact that he had developed a passionate and apparently non-negotiable attachment to a particular yellow cup that had to be present at every meal, or the entire situation collapsed. Logan watched us. I noticed that the way he tracked the temperature of the room when we were both in it, the way he visibly relaxed when a conversation went easily and tensed slightly when it didn't. He was still exhausted, still applying for jobs with the focused desperation of a man who knows the clock is running, still carrying more than was reasonable to carry. But he was also, for the first time in years, present. Actually present. Not the managed, half-distracted version of himself I'd been getting on the phone for the past several years, but here, in the room, dealing with what was actually happening. That, I found, was its own kind of relief. The harder conversation with Logan came on a Thursday evening in late November. Natalie had gone to bed early, the medication adjustments were still making her tired, and some evenings she simply ran out by 8. And Eli was down, and Logan and I were at the kitchen table with cups of tea neither of us was really drinking. He started it. That mattered. He started it instead of waiting for me to, which was something he would not have done a year ago. "Mom," he said, "I need to talk to you about the hospital, about all of it." "Okay," I said. He looked at his tea for a moment. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for a while, how to say it in a way that's honest without just being, I don't know, without it being a performance. You've seen enough performances from me." That landed. I let it land without filling the silence. "I knew what I was doing," he said finally, "at the hospital, when I came down to the lobby. I'm not going to tell you I was confused or that I didn't realize how bad it was, because I did realize, and I did it anyway." He looked up. "Natalie had told me weeks before that she didn't want you there. And instead of having a real conversation with her about it, or with you, I just let it happen. I took the path that created the least conflict in that moment, and that path meant you drove 12 hours and stood in a lobby. I sat with that, the honesty of it, the absence of softening. And the bill," he said. "I listed you because I panicked about the money, and I told myself it wasn't technically, that it wasn't a big deal, that you probably wouldn't even hear about it for a while, and by then we'd have it sorted," which was a lie I was telling myself, because the real version was that I had spent my whole life knowing you would handle things, and I did it again, without even thinking. He stopped. "Say the rest," I said quietly. "I took you for granted," he said. "Not once. For years. And I did it because you made it so easy to. Because you never pushed back, never made me feel the weight of what it cost you, and I used that." He shook his head. "I used it, and I called it love, and it wasn't. It was convenience dressed up as family." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive me tonight," he said. "I know it doesn't work like that. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it said clearly, without me looking for a way to make myself feel better about it at the end." I looked at my son across that table. He was 33 years old. He had lines at the corners of his eyes now that hadn't been there the last time I'd looked at him closely, and his hair had a bit of gray starting at the temples, and he looked tired, yes, but also something else. Something that takes longer to earn than a good job or a polished life. He looked like someone who had been through something and come out the other side with fewer defenses and more honesty. "Logan," I said, "I'm going to tell you something too, because I think this conversation only works if we're both in it." He waited. "I made it easy for you to take me for granted because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I was afraid that if you felt burdened by me, you'd leave, that I'd become one of those mothers that their children drift away from because they ask too much. And so I asked for nothing. I accepted everything, and I turned myself into someone without edges, without needs, without the right to object." I paused. "I taught you that I was inexhaustible, and you believed me. I don't put all of that on you." He was quiet for a moment. "You shouldn't have had to do that," he said. "You shouldn't have had to make yourself smaller to keep me." "No," I said. "I shouldn't have. But I did. And neither of us is going to fully understand all the reasons why in one conversation." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "What matters right now is that we're both talking. Actually talking, not managing each other." He turned his hand over and held mine. His grip was the same as it had been when he was small. The same particular way he'd held my hand crossing streets, certain and not quite as tight as it felt. I noticed that. The way certain things persist through all the years and all the distance, quietly unchanged. We sat like that for a few minutes without saying anything. Then I picked up my tea. He picked up his, and we started talking, was really talking, the way we hadn't since he was young, about things that mattered, and things that were small, and things that were in between, and it wasn't clean and it wasn't finished, but it was ours. Logan found a job in January. A firm in Brooklyn, smaller than the previous one, slightly less prestigious, considerably saner hours. He called to tell me, and his voice had a quality in it I had not heard in a long time. Relief mixed with something that was almost humility. The certainty he had always carried. The easy professional confidence of a man who had never had to question whether he was succeeding, had been rubbed down by the preceding months into something more careful, more aware of its own limits. I thought that was probably not a bad thing. I thought it, and I didn't say it, because not everything true needs to be said. Natalie's treatment moved into a maintenance phase. She was still working through things, would be for a while. Her therapist had been clear about that. But the worst of it had stabilized, and there were days now, more of them, when she came home from an appointment looking like someone returning from difficult work, rather than someone who had been wrung out by it. She started drawing again. Logan had mentioned once, early on, that she'd studied art in college before switching to finance, and I hadn't known what to do with that information at the time. But now I watched her sketch at the kitchen table sometimes while Eli napped, and I thought about how much of herself she had buried under the version she'd decided was acceptable, and I understood that better than she probably knew. We were not friends. I want to be precise about this because the story deserves precision. Natalie and I were not going to become the mother and daughter-in-law of someone's idealized version of family reconciliation. We were two women who had hurt each other, one directly and one by omission, who had decided to build something functional and occasionally genuine on top of that history. Some weeks it felt like progress. Some weeks one of us said something that caught on an old wound, and we both had to step back and let it settle before moving forward. But we kept moving forward. That was the thing. Neither of us stopped. Eli turned 2 in November of the following year. I drove up for it this time. I had gotten my car serviced in September, specifically so I could make the trip. And I arrived on a Friday afternoon with a bag over my shoulder and a wrapped gift under my arm, the same configuration I'd had 2 years earlier when I'd stood in that lobby. And I noticed the difference in my own body this time. No racing heart, no desperate hope, no carefully maintained performance of patience. I just drove up. Because I was welcome. Because I belonged there. Logan opened the door before I'd finished parking, because Eli had apparently developed the ability to detect my car from the second floor window, which Logan reported with a helpless, fond exasperation that was one of the most beautiful things I had heard him say in years. "He's been at the window for 20 minutes, Logan said. I told him it wasn't time yet, and he looked at me like I'd personally offended him. I laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. And then Eli came around Logan's legs at a run, at a full, uncoordinated 2-year-old run, arms out for balance, face arranged into an expression of pure, uncomplicated delight. And he crashed into my legs and grabbed on and looked up at me and said, with absolute authority, the word that I had waited 2 years to hear directed at me without hesitation or asterisk or qualifier. Gamma. Not grandma, not yet. He couldn't manage the full word. But gamma. His word. Mine. I picked him up. He was heavier than I expected, solid and warm, and he grabbed a fistful of my hair immediately, which he had apparently decided was a greeting. And I stood in that doorway holding my grandson while my eyes filled completely, and I let them, this time, because there was no performance required, no image to maintain, no careful dignity to protect. I just let it happen. Logan put his hand on my back, briefly. No words. He didn't need any. The birthday party was small. A few of Eli's friends from the neighborhood, Natalie's sister Claire and her husband Dorothy, who had driven up with me and immediately made herself at home in the kitchen in the way that Dorothy does everywhere she goes, to the visible relief of everyone present. Diane was there. I had known she would be, and I had made a decision sometime in the preceding months about how I was going to feel about that. The decision was this. Diane had been there for Eli's first year in ways I hadn't, and that was true. And I could either spend the rest of my life resenting the space she'd occupied, or I could show up and occupy my own space and let Eli have 2 grandmothers who both loved him in their own ways. He was not a pie. There was not a fixed amount of grandmother to go around. My showing up did not require her to be diminished. I introduced myself in the kitchen. She was shorter than I expected from the photos. She had kind eyes and a slightly formal manner that softened within the first 10 minutes. And we found, awkwardly and then less awkwardly, that we both thought Eli's current obsession with trucks was hilarious, that we were both slightly baffled by the specific brand of birthday cake Logan had ordered that tasted primarily of ambition, and that we were both, fundamentally, there for the same reason. We didn't become close, but we became something. Cordial. Aware of each other. 2 women who had been placed in a dynamic neither of us had designed and had both decided, in our own ways, to choose something better than competition. After cake, after Eli had destroyed the paper on his gifts with the focused demolition energy of a 2-year-old after the guests had begun to drift toward coats and goodbyes, Logan found me sitting on the living room floor with Eli in my lap, reading the truck book. Yes, the same one, now battered at the corners and missing its back cover, while Eli pointed at the pictures with grave authority and named them. "Twuck," he said, pointing at a dump truck. "That's right," I said. "What does it do?" He made an engine sound that went on considerably longer than necessary and then looked at me for approval. "Exactly right," I said. "You've got that exactly right." Logan sat on the couch behind us and watched. I could feel him there without looking. After a moment, he said quietly, so Eli wouldn't redirect his attention, "Mom." "I'm sorry it took so long." He wasn't talking about the party. "I'm sorry it took losing everything before I understood what I had." I turned the page of the truck book. Eli immediately pointed at the next vehicle with the same grave authority. "Twuck," he announced. It was a fire engine, but I didn't correct him. "You understand it now," I said. "That's what matters." "Is it enough?" Logan asked. "I need to know if it's enough. Not for me. I know I don't get to just decide that. I mean, can we actually build something from here? Something real?" I thought about the notepad. The question I'd written 2 years ago, still sitting on my kitchen table in Millhaven, the pen still resting across it. I thought about the answer it had taken me this long to find. "We're already building it," I said. "You're just noticing it now." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I love you, Mom." It was the first time he had said that without it being a reflexive goodbye at the end of a phone call. The first time it had arrived as its own complete sentence, standing on its own without anything else holding it up. "I know," I said. "I love you too." Eli, sensing that the adult conversation had gone on long enough without him, reached up and grabbed my chin and turned my face back toward the truck book. I went. Because some redirections are gifts. I'm going to tell you how it is now, not how it's going to be forever. I'm 64, not omniscient, and anyone who tells you they know how things are going to be forever is selling something. But how it is now. I drive to New York 4 times a year, sometimes 5. I have a key to their apartment, which Natalie gave me on a Tuesday in March without making a ceremony of it, just handed it across the kitchen table and said, "In case we need you." And I took it and put it on my keyring and didn't say much, because sometimes the moment requires nothing more than receiving. Logan calls on Sundays again. Not every Sunday. There are still gaps, still weeks where life crowds it out. But more often than not, on Sunday morning, my phone rings, and it's him, and we talk for a real amount of time about real things. He tells me about projects at the new firm. I tell him about the watercolor class, which I am still attending, still bad at, still going to. He laughs about the trees that look like clouds. I laugh too. Natalie texts me sometimes. Not often, not daily, but sometimes. A photo of Eli doing something ridiculous, a question about a recipe I'd made when I was there. Once a message that said simply, "Today was a hard day with nothing else." And I wrote back, "I know those." "You're doing fine." I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I sent it anyway. She said, "Thank you." We moved on. The hospital bill was eventually settled. Logan handled it slowly, with a payment plan that took the better part of a year. He never asked me again. I never brought it up. Some things are better finished than discussed. Dorothy came with me on my last trip and spent 3 days sleeping on the couch and becoming Eli's second favorite person in the apartment, which she accepted with the serene confidence of a woman who has always known she is excellent company. She and Natalie talked for 2 hours one evening about things I wasn't privy to and came out of it both looking slightly surprised by the other, which I chose to take as a good sign. The crib is still in Dorothy's garage. The yellow ducks are still on the headboard, slightly faded now. I've been thinking about refinishing it again, repainting the ducks, doing it properly this time. Eli is too old for it now, obviously, but Logan and Natalie have not ruled out a second child, and either way I find I'm not ready to let it go. It's mine. The Saturday mornings I spent on it, the care I put in, the hope. Those things belong to me regardless of where the crib ends up. I keep the key to their apartment on my key ring, next to my house key, next to the little metal disc that used to be on Clover the rabbit's collar, the tag that Logan put on my key ring when he was 12 as a joke, and I kept because I kept everything. There is something I want to say to you before I finish. Not as a character in a story, but as a woman who has been through something and come out the other side with a few things she knows for certain. I know that there are people listening to this who are where I was 2 years ago, who have given everything, their energy, their savings, their sleep, their second chances, to someone they love, and who are sitting right now in the particular silence of a person who has been made invisible by the people they made possible, who are being told, in 100 small ways, that their value is financial, and their presence is optional, and their feelings are an inconvenience. I want to say to you, that is not love. I don't care what name is attached to it, or how long it has been going on, or how many times you've been told that this is just how families work. What I'm describing is not love. It is the long habit of taking without accounting, and it persists only as long as the person on the other end permits it to. You are allowed to stop permitting it. Not with anger. Anger is useful for a moment, but it burns fast and leaves you tired. With clarity. With the quiet, absolute, unperformative decision that you are a person with worth that does not need to be earned by your usefulness to someone else. That your dignity is not a luxury you get to have after everyone else's needs are met. That the years you have left belong to you, and spending them chasing the approval of someone who has shown you consistently that your presence is conditional. That is a choice. It is not obligation, it is not love, it is not family duty. It is a choice. And you can make a different one. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. Refusing to be listed on a hospital bill without your consent is not selfishness. Saying no to being someone's financial safety net while being excluded from their joy, that is not coldness. That is a person finally understanding the difference between love and exploitation. I know it costs something. I know that the silence that follows a real boundary feels like loss. And sometimes it is loss, and you have to grieve it like any other loss. Not skip over it, not pretend it doesn't hurt, but actually sit with it until you come out the other side. I sat with mine. For a long time in an Ohio kitchen with a cooling cup of coffee and a notepad with one question on it. And what I found on the other side was not the perfect family I had wanted. It was something harder and smaller and more honest than that. A son who is learning, still imperfectly, to see me as a person rather than a resource. A daughter-in-law who started from fear and is trying to get to something better. A grandson who runs at me full speed when I come through the door and calls me Gamma with the total, uncomplicated certainty of someone who has never had to question whether he is loved. That is what I have. It is real. It is earned. And not a single part of it required me to give up the thing I nearly lost in all those years of quiet, accommodating invisibility. My own self-respect, my own right to be treated as a human being by the people I love. If you are a mother listening to this who has given everything and been thanked for nothing, hear me. The giving was real, the love was real, but love does not require you to be erased by it. You are allowed to be both generous and dignified. You are allowed to say, I will love you and I will not disappear for you. These things are not opposites. And if you have children listening, hear this too. The woman who raised you is not furniture. She is not a safety net. She is not a function. She is a person who made choices, enormous, costly, often invisible choices, to put you in a position to live the life you're living. She will not be here forever. The years she has left are hers. Ask yourself honestly, are you treating her like she matters? Not in the abstract, not in theory. On the specific ordinary Tuesday when you could have called and didn't. When you made the seating chart and put her at table 9. When you listed her name on the paperwork and didn't mention it for 6 months. On that Tuesday. In that moment. Are you treating her like she matters? Because one day you will be in a hospital lobby somewhere and you will think about that Tuesday. And what you find when you think about it will tell you everything you need to know about the kind of person you became. Last October, Eli and I were in Dorothy's backyard. He had just turned 2.5 and had recently discovered that fallen leaves could be thrown into the air with great force and would come down in a very satisfying cascade around you, which he had decided was the finest entertainment available to a person of his age and intelligence. He threw a handful of leaves. They came down around his head. He looked at me with his whole face open. That total, undivided delight that children have before the world teaches them to manage their reactions. And he said, Gamma, again. Again, I agreed. He threw another handful. The leaves came down gold and brown and a little bit red. The Ohio fall doing what it always does, reliable and extravagant and entirely indifferent to whether anyone is watching. He turned around and ran at me, arms out, and I caught him, and I held him up against my chest in the autumn light. And I felt his small heart going fast from running, and I thought about 34 years in that house, and Richard, and the blue bedroom walls, and the 63 monthly installments, and table 9, and the lobby, and the notepad, and the key on my key ring. I thought about all of it, and I held my grandson in my arms, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because I had begged for it, not because I had made myself small enough, or accommodating enough, or invisible enough to be permitted here. Because I had refused, finally, to be anything less than what I was. And in refusing, I had made room for myself, for Logan, for Natalie, for this child in my arms who would grow up knowing, without ever having to be told, that his grandmother was a woman who knew her own worth. That is the legacy I want to leave him. Not money, not property, not a crib with yellow ducks on the headboard, though I love that crib. This, the knowledge, lived and demonstrated and passed down in the particular quiet way that real things are passed down, that dignity is not something you earn from other people's permission. It is something you decide. And you can decide it at 62, in a bus station, with a vending machine sandwich and 12 hours of travel in your legs, and a heart that is breaking, and a mind that is finally beginning to ask the right questions. It is never too late to decide.